All right, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. And if you're new to this, essentially the process that we're going to go through is I'll recap the news in the solar industry for the last week or so. Then we'll touch on whatever webinars are coming up and conferences and things like that. And then we go into a little bit of a deeper dive on a topic that's relevant to the solar industry. This week, what we're going to be talking about is some of the incentive programs and tax benefits that are available if you want to go with solar. And I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. So why don't we go ahead and jump into this? And as per always, those folks who are online right now, if you've got any questions or comments as we're moving forward, just feel free to jump on in. And that way we can have a bit of a discussion. So one of the goals that was part of the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in August of 2022 was to incentivize the development of a domestic manufacturing capacity for solar, for all of the solar components. And that appears to be working quite nicely. In fact, in the first quarter of this year, there was an increase or an addition of about 11 gigawatts of manufacturing capacity of solar panels. Now that brings the total up to 27 gigawatts of capacity. So if you do the math, 11, that means we started out at 16. So it's a 70% increase in manufacturing capacity just in the last 3 months, which is pretty dramatic. If you look at the amount of solar that was installed in 2023, the U.S. added about 40 gigawatts of capacity last year. So once again, we have 27 gigawatts of annualized manufacturing capacity. We installed 40 gigawatts. So about 2/3. So if we did do it where everybody who installed solar in the U.S. bought U.S. manufactured panels, we could handle about 2/3 of them right now. Now, obviously, that doesn't work that way, but that just shows you about where we are in the development of the domestic manufacturing capacity. Now, solar in 2023 accounted for about 75% of all of the new generating capacity that was added to the grid in that year. Investments in clean energy have jumped. They've jumped about 40% quarter over quarter in the first quarter of this year. And so what we found is businesses spent about $71 billion in the first 3 months of this year. That's up from $51 billion a year ago. When investment in wind energy is actually declining, it fell about 32%. Solar investment got more than any other all forms of energy combined. Worldwide investment in all forms of energy actually is anticipated this year to exceed $3 trillion. And out of that investment, 2/3 of it, or about $2 trillion, is going to be in clean energy and renewable energy. The rest, of course, will be in fossil fuels, which obviously have not gone away. A new study by Lawrence Berkeley Labs found that the health benefits from the transition to renewable energy, to wind and solar specifically, are greater than was initially projected. The study found that from 2019 to 2022, wind and solar provided about $249 billion in climate and air quality health benefits. This amounts to 14.3 cents per kilowatt hour generated by wind and about 10 cents per kilowatt hour generated by solar, which I found very interesting. In fact, the health benefits of generating energy through these systems are greater than the cost of buying this energy, significantly greater at the wholesale level, which is fascinating. Now, the researchers relied on studies published in the science journal Nature as the basis for determining how these health benefit costs were associated with carbon emissions. They speculated in this report that in 2022 alone, wind and solar energy prevented about 1,200 to 1,600 premature deaths in the U.S. that otherwise would have occurred had that energy been generated through fossil fuels. And the next time your uncle, who's anti-solar, tells you that in 20 years or so, you're going to start seeing a lot of solar panels being thrown into landfills and that it's not as clean as you really think it is, you should maybe point him towards a recent EPA ruling against the state of Alabama, where Alabama petitioned to allow utilities to continue to store coal ash, which is a toxic byproduct of burning coal, in unlined pits that are located near the utility generating facilities. In 2015, the EPA had adopted new coal ash rules that outline the safe disposal requirements for this coal ash. But a 2019 report by the Environmental Integrity Project found that these rules were basically being ignored. 91% of the coal power plants were not complying with the new rules, continuing to store coal ash that contains arsenic, lead, mercury, selenium, cadmium, a lot of toxic materials in unlined ponds that leach these toxins into groundwater and nearby streams and rivers. And we're talking about a lot of waste here. Coal ash remains one of the nation's largest industrial waste products, generating about 110 million tons annually. The Biden administration began concentrating on an effort to enforce these regulations in January of 2022, which led to this then petition by Alabama to get out of complying with them. And the birthplace of Thomas Edison recently went solar. Now, Edison is famous for, he's got a famous quote. He apparently in 1931 told Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone, the quote was, "I'd put my money on sun and solar energy. What a source of power." I'm going to mute some of these things. Oops. There we go. What a source of power. I hope we don't wait until oil and coal to run out before we tackle that. So just 93 years later, a bunch of volunteers from the solar industry, installers and manufacturers, have put solar on the birthplace home of Thomas Edison, which is located in Milan, don't know how to pronounce it, everybody. I'd say Milan, but of course I'd be Italian. Milan, Ohio, which is now going to be functioning from solar. And that is the news from the solar industry for this week. Anybody have anything else that they want to add to that before I jump into some of the events? Okay, they pronounce it Milan. Okay, why not? It's like Berlin. You know, we have a Berlin, Ohio and a Milan, Ohio. So everybody's got to pronounce it. Yep, Milan. Okay. All right. So we've got proper pronunciation there. So anybody else have any news they want to add to this? All right. Well, let me jump in and to the announcements for the week. And upcoming webinar here today, 2 p.m., renewable data management using AI is going to be happening. And I'll just remind you again that I'm not giving you the links for these, just making you aware that these things exist. The 11th through the 13th is an agrivoltaics conference over in Denver, Colorado. Then there's a PACE. PACE is a financing system for solar in Nashville. The PACE Summit, June 13th through the 12th through the 13th. Another conference in San Francisco, Solar and Storage Summit, the 12th and the 13th. Then there's a webinar on the 13th at noon about innovative balance of systems components within solar design. The IREC is going to be having a workforce recruiting session on June 20th at 2 p.m. There's, and this isn't truly solar, but it is in a way. The Reimagine Appalachia on June 20th is having a session about unpacking what's in the Farm Bill. And where this relates to solar, we're going to be touching on this a little bit later. But in the Farm Bill, there's funding for the REAP grant system. So definitely interested in attending that. June 27th at 2 p.m., There's Trina Solar tracking systems that they're going to be discussing. And July 18th through the 19th, the RE Plus Mid-Atlanta in Philadelphia. That's a face-to-face conference. And then I should probably remove this. It's a white paper about how to maximize home battery investment. And then, of course, there's the classes that we have face to face and online at solarpvtraining.com. All right, so those are the events. Anybody want to add anything to that before we jump into our discussion on some of the financing that's out there, some of the grants and tax benefits? Give you just a second as I ramble here. Right. Everybody's being so quiet. All right. Well, let's talk about some of the incentives, some of the grants that are available. And this is by no means a comprehensive list because there are a lot of localized incentives that are local to your utility. There's a geographically limited, like Ohio incentives. There's localized tax incentives. There's city incentives, things of that nature. So it'd just be impossible to touch on all of them. But when we're out doing assessments and the like, these are the main incentives that we do discuss with folks, the ones that are generally well utilized out there in the field. All right. So before we get into the incentives, I just oftentimes will, when I'm not doing an incentive, an assessment for a commercial property, we just discuss the fact that solar is already the cheapest form of electricity there is. Electricity generated through solar, the levelized cost of production is lowest in solar. It surpassed or got cheaper than wind just in recent years. But if you look at, from going on up, it's going to be natural gas. So those three are the main competitors at the moment, although natural gas is going away, and it's all simply because of the economics of development. Geothermal, coal, thermal solar, which is concentrated solar, basically. Nuclear, one of the very highest costs. And somewhere in there, not on this particular chart, is battery, which is catching up and growing quite. And we talk about battery as an energy source, but most people will think of it as storage, where you're not really producing from it. You're just simply getting stored energy out of it. But I would argue that coal, oil, natural gas, those are all storage mechanisms as well. It's just that it took longer for that energy to be stored. So it makes sense to talk about batteries as another generating source. So it is already cheapest, and now it's on sale. The Biden administration specifically has targeted a complete reimagining of our grid. These are topics we've discussed here over various sessions, but essentially looking at how do we transform the grid as dramatically as the telecommunications infrastructure was transformed in the last couple of decades, going from plain old telephone to the world of the internet and wireless communications, ubiquitous data pretty much everywhere. Well, we're going to be doing this over the next couple of decades with the electrical grid, going from a structured, regulated utility where they generate power at a central location, you receive it like a dummy terminal on a computer network, not a lot of bidirectional communication going on here, to the Internet of Things being integrated on the electrical grid, to distributed energy being ubiquitous, to the electrification of the transportation industry, using EV batteries as battery backup for the electrical grid, virtual utilities, virtual power plants. All of these things are going to so dramatically change the way that we deal with electricity, so as that the electrical grid in 20 years will look as little like the telecommunication infrastructure of 20 years ago looks to us today, or 30 years ago, I guess. Time flies. So that's what we're doing. And so the Biden administration is saying, okay, we have to begin this process. And so everything's on sale. They're incentivizing this stuff out the wazoo. So I just picked this headline from the EPA here just to kind of dramatize that. And that is one of the longest headlines I've seen in a long time. So apparently they weren't too concerned about space for their headline. So just an example there, but we'll get into what are the incentives. The go-to spot for incentives typically is Desire. Desire, the website, it's www.dsireusa.org. Desire, it's up there in the left-hand corner. And you can find all of the different energy policies by state. You just go into this website. There's this map. You click on the state that you want to go to, and it will give you a recap of all of the different incentives. In fact, maybe too many, because some of them are pretty esoteric when you get in there. Like specifics on utility rebate programs for EV charging stations, for example, or the city of Cleveland giving a property abatement for solar, so that they don't increase the value of your property based on you adding solar. So those kind of things, they get very detailed in that regard. So anyway, thought we would jump in with the granddaddy of them all here, which is the investment tax credit. And the investment tax credit has morphed and changed over the years. It started, I think, back in 2004. And it starts at 30%. And we've always had short-term policies here. And that was one of the criticisms that people would have of it. It would say, okay, for the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to have 30%, then it's going to step down to 26%, then 22%, then it goes away. And there was a lot of discussion that this short-term thinking really made it difficult to ramp up the installation infrastructure, especially, and you'd see wide swings. People would try and get in at the deadline before the grants changed and the like. Well, anyway, with the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, they extended it out with more long-term perspective. So the 30% tax credit that's part of the Inflation Reduction Act began in 2022. It will go all the way at 30% up to 2032. Then we'll see it step down to 26% in 2023, and 2034, it'll drop down to 22%. So that's what the basic tax credit is. And this is at the residential. I should have pointed out, this is at the residential level. So you as a homeowner can take advantage of this. And the way you take advantage of it is when you file your taxes. You would file Form 5695, and there's an option down here that just says how much did the solar electric system cost. You plug that thing in, and then it gets multiplied by 30%. And that's how you get your tax credit. And it is a credit. It's not a deduction. So if you owe $10,000 in your taxes and you spent, I'll try and throw $30,000 on a solar array, then the 30% tax credit on that would be $9,000. Am I doing my math? Yeah, that's right. So you would then only pay $1,000 in taxes. You get a $9,000 deduction from your taxes, a tax credit. So it's real money. Real money. If you don't owe taxes, if you don't have enough taxes that you would use up your entire tax credit, it will roll over, and it rolls over for a number of years. I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's like as much as 25 years. That might be wrong, but it seems to me I read that somewhere. I'm sure it was on the internet, so it must be right. Nobody ever lies there. Yeah, Bill, you have a question?
Yes, I was on Rewire America. They had a comment that the tax credits, or that it didn't have to be owner occupied, that it doesn't have to be the owner's primary home. It can be a secondary home. and that would be crucial for people who have say an apartment, or they own the house that their children are living in. So that's something I would like to have clarified.
Yeah, I read that as well. Second homes qualify, and apartments do as long as you live there part of the year. Um, this credit also extends to commercial properties as well, which we'll get in a bit. So if it's an investment property like an apartment building, yes, you can definitely take it. It's just handled slightly different in a different reporting mechanism. But yeah, for residential properties, it appeared to me when I read it, and I'm no tax accountant, but it appeared they're just kind of trying to incentivize everybody to put solar everywhere. So they didn't make it as a distinction. If you've got a beach home somewhere, cabin somewhere, it would still qualify as a residential property for this particular tax credit.
Jay, I looked into that just in the last week, and it was pretty clear still that the residential tax credit only applies towards your primary residence, and it gave guidance on how to determine is your residence your primary or not.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know what I mean. I'm saying when I did the research here, I specifically saw an article in one of the accounting that said secondary homes are fine. So maybe that's changed, or maybe you saw something that was pre IRA.
I was looking on the IRS web page.
Yeah, oh, that's a mistake. Never go there for tax advice. you know, you need you need somebody who actually knows something, right? So yeah.
There is also the old provision in the old tax code that said that solar would be qualified in apartments or rental property if the rental property was 3 stories or more, which completely eliminated most of the mom and pop rental operations.
Yeah. I don't think that it makes that distinction in the new IRA provisions. Because remember, the whole investment tax credit thing was reauthorized in the IRA, and expanded pretty dramatically. So I know there used to be a lot of restrictions. So I mean, clearly you're pointing into flaws in my research. So I'm not feeling 100% confident about the things I'm telling you. So I mean, not that particular thing. I don't want to discount everything.
Oh,
So
oh, I think it's vague. I think
yeah.
that's I think everybody's vagueness on this is a little bit justified.
Uh-huh. Well, that makes sense because, of course, one of the things that I was researching, and I've done this many, many times, when we get to it, the domestic product bonus, or the energy community bonus, and I've tried to find out, does that apply just to commercial or to residential? And nowhere can I find a definitive statement that says it only applies to commercial. It feels like that's what they're hinting towards, but I could not find where they specifically state that. And, that to me is a big deal. My guess is that's the case, and that's what I'm going to tell you I think it is. But yeah, everything's vague. And then when they try and clarify it, it just gets less clear, because these guys are tax lawyers and engineers and all of that. So they can't actually talk in common sense. But it's definitely problematic. Okay, so I did look at some things here that about some of the other provisions on the residential. It is owner occupied, so that doesn't answer the thing about whether it's a second home qualifies, or anything like that. No solar leases, that's pretty clear. If you're leasing the equipment or doing a power purchase agreement, no, the person who owns it is going to get these tax benefits. You claim it in the year that the system is activated, not necessarily the year that you bought the stuff. So if it does transfer over, calendar years or tax years, that's something to bear in mind. And it does seem apparently to cover the equipment, the labor, batteries are included, which at one point they were not, and sales tax. So the sales tax becomes something that you get a credit on as well. So
Hey, Jay,
yeah,
this
yeah.
is Ted. Does this apply only to grid tied, or standalone is qualified as well?
I believe standalone qualifies on this as well. That's my understanding. And if we've got any tax accountants on here, chime in periodically. But I think we had that question once before. And it seems to me Don, who's on here a lot, who is a tax accountant, said yes, doesn't matter, standalone, grid tied.
Standalone or grid tied, you're right, Jay. And as far as the residence and home, you can use it on a second home as long as you don't rent it out.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'll put the link to the IRS's website in there if we want, but that's the rule.
So it's if you're doing it as a verbo or a bed and breakfast or something like that, it would be a commercial activity and not a residential.
That's what the IRS would say, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Okay. But you still may be able to get that deduction under the commercial.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you don't get it. That just means you don't get the residential credit.
Yeah. Okay.
So standalone on a barn or an outbuilding that's used for a wood shop as part of your residential or your own business operation. Does that apply?
Well, which one is it? Residential or your own business operation? Do you live there or do you work there?
Yes. Absolutely.
If it's your house and it's part of your, if it's a barn on your house, I don't think you have any issue. If it is part of your business, that's a different credit, but you still shouldn't have any issue. One way or the other, you should be able to credit this.
Yeah, it sounds like it just depends on what form and what line on what form you would take the deduction.
Yeah, I mean, I assume the barn on your, if it's your house, you might put the array on your barn, but you're going to be powering your house, not the barn. And if you're powering the barn, it sounds like you've got a cattle operation or something in there that needs electricity, not that you're turning the lights on when you go in there to get your tractor out.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
And we run into that distinction quite a lot when we do the REAP grants, which I'll touch on, because there is a big distinction there. But as far as the IRS with this tax credit, they're just trying to give you an incentive of 30%, whether it's a commercial operation, an agricultural operation, or a residential operation. It's just that how you apply for it might vary, as you fill out your various forms. But all of them should get the 30% tax credit. All right. Then there's also some things other than solar arrays that qualify as part of this. And you'll notice on that form, there were other places you could put, but you can also get a credit on the exterior windows, skylights, doors, insulation. So making the envelope of your building weather tight, but there are limitations there. With the solar, there used to be limitations, but they've eliminated the cost limitations. You can deduct 30% of whatever it costs. But with this, for instance, doors, $250 maximum for each door and $500 each year. So there are cost limitations there, but it's worthwhile looking at. And then if you're putting in appliances, I assume these all have to be Energy Star or something. But water heaters, heat pumps, air conditioners, boilers, stoves, all of those things are also eligible for some of those energy efficiency credits, and you would file that on that same form as you do the solar array form that you're dealing with. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about RECs. I say X, RECs or SRECs. So if you're not familiar with RECs, a REC or an SREC is just a solar REC. A REC is a renewable energy certificate or credit. SREC is a solar renewable energy credit. And there are only a few specific states that have a REC market. And effectively what this is it's a carbon credit, more or less. You're not selling electricity, you're selling the right for a utility to claim that the electricity as part of their portfolio is being generated renewably. And the reason they need to do this is because these state legislatures have passed some portfolio standards, renewable energy portfolio standards, that say, okay, we want to generate a certain percentage of the electricity within our state from renewable sources. And you, Mr. Utility, if you don't meet that goal, we're going to impose fines on you. So the utility has some choice. They can either go out there and install solar or wind to meet these goals, or they can buy this power from somebody who's generating it renewably. Or what they can also do is go to someone like me or Ted or Don, people who have solar arrays, and say, okay, we want to be able to claim the power that's being produced by your system as part of our portfolio. Now, it does require, and I shouldn't have said Ted and Don because I think they've got off-grid systems. It does require these grid systems be connected to the grid, so that it's part of it doesn't have to be in that utility's service region, but it does have to be connected to the grid. And so if the utility is going to get fined $300 if they haven't produced it, then that's kind of the maximum price they're willing to pay for a REC is $300. There'd be no reason for them to pay more than what they're being fined. But if the fine's only $10, that's going to be the max. But it depends. There are a lot of factors that fall in. How much renewable energy is available in that geographic region? What is the fine? How much has the utility invested in renewables? All of these kind of things, which then develop a market price for a REC. And you can actually sell that. There's this website here called SREC Trade. You can go in there, you can register your system. One of the things you're going to need to do if you register your system for sale of RECs is you've got to make sure you've got a proper meter on that, and I forget the term, just escaped my head, like a utility grade meter. So that, because if you've got, like, for instance, one of the old style end-phase systems that didn't have the consumption CTs or the production CTs built into it, the term came back. It's called revenue grade meters. So you got to make sure you've got the right record keeping process. You then sign in, they pay them an annual fee, and then you get that, you sign long-term contracts, short-term contracts. I know Don just said he's getting 32 bucks from per REC from Pennsylvania. I'll touch on some of these here in a minute, but these are the places that have REC markets: New Jersey, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Maryland, District of Columbia, Ohio, Delaware. North Carolina is just getting started. California, not so much. Illinois, Virginia. Illinois got a little bit of a complicated one. So what are these RECs selling for currently? I just looked them up on that website. These are the bid prices. New Jersey REC selling for $207 a REC. Now, a REC represents 1 megawatt hour of generation. So we've got like a 8 kW system on our farm, and that 8 kW system generates about, on average, 1 megawatt hour a month. So then if I was living in New Jersey and I sold these RECs, I'm going to get $207 a month for selling a REC per month, or 12 over the course of the year. So over the course of the year, you're generating what, $2,400 or so, which is great. Because I'm not selling my electricity. I'm just selling the right for the utility to claim that as part of their renewable energy portfolio. So in Massachusetts, you get $300 a month. So this is pretty dramatic when you're in those states that have aggressive portfolio standards. States like Pennsylvania, the bid price was $35 a month. And their legislation, and I think Don just indicated that might have changed recently in the chat there, but anyone who lives within the PJM regulatory district, which includes Ohio, it includes West Virginia, it includes parts of Kentucky. You can sell to Pennsylvania. You've got to register your system in Pennsylvania. Don, what did they just say about the changes that the PA legislatures put through? You had noted that.
I think that's Brian who put it in there, Jay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Brian, do you want to comment on that?
I just know that this actually happened quite a while ago. I was working with my previous company, and I helped them put in a solar array. And even at that point, that's like 12 years ago, this had already happened where they diluted this by letting people from surrounding states sell into Pennsylvania. So the SREX went from like 320 to down to 32.
Uh-huh.
So, their Pennsylvania legislature decided to hurt Pennsylvania solar owners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they helped people who lived in Ohio and in West Virginia. So
Awesome.
So I guess that's all good, right?
I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. So in Ohio, I know in West Virginia, they sell into it a lot. Obviously, in Kentucky, they do as well. But Pennsylvania is definitely a marketplace because if you look down the list, Ohio RECs are selling for $3 a REC. And Brian, I'll point out that we do allow Pennsylvania people to sell into the Ohio market as well. So if you want to go ahead and sell your RECs for $3, you can come to Ohio because we're generous that way. Largely, it's the reason our RECs are so small or so low is because the legislature basically diluted the portfolio standards. Many states, when you reach a goal, let's say you say 25% from renewables, you get close to that, the legislature says, oh, okay, we've almost made 25. Why don't we increase that to 30 or 35? Ohio, we were at like 24 and dropped it to 12, so we're always good that way. You can see DC 442. Now, the article I was looking at on this site said that anyone within PJM could sell to DC. I have trouble believing that because if that were the case, I would think everyone would be selling in DC. I've heard of a lot of people who are developing systems selling in Pennsylvania, and they get $35 there or 32. But I haven't heard of anyone selling in DC. I thought that the system had to be located in DC. Might be wrong, but that's what I believed. Delaware 400. I know Delaware's got to be located in Delaware. Illinois, it's not so straightforward. In fact, Illinois system, their RECs, which I think they called the Solar for All program, they've got it broken down in different based on sizes of arrays, so less than 10 kW. And the Group A and the Group B are essentially different utilities, different groupings of utilities. So it really is where within the state you happen to reside. But for a very small system in Group A, you could be getting as much as $180 a REC there. And then, of course, the larger the system, the less per REC. That's for residential. Then you get into larger residential systems, and you can see that they drop down significantly when you get up into the 1,000 kW type size. And then if you get nonprofits and public facilities, so they do allow for these RECs with nonprofits and governmental bodies and the like. So there's a whole process there. I know we interact with with Illinois a bit because in order to qualify for these RECs, the installation company has to meet certain provisions. One of those is that the installers have to be certified in an industry certification program like ETA International or NABCEP. So we get folks who come through the training there just in order to qualify for that. Some of the other system benefits that are out there, like sales tax exemptions. Many states do say that when you go to buy your solar material product, it's going to be exempted from the local sales tax. Property tax exemptions. So if you just spent $50,000 putting a solar array on your property, then the property assessment is not going to go up $50,000, and then you end up getting penalized for doing an improvement to your facility. So many cities and jurisdictions are saying, you know what, we're not going to add cost there. Somebody just mentioned, Pete did, Wisconsin and Minnesota have property tax exemptions. That's good. Local utility incentives. Some of these are mandated by the courts. I know that there have been a number of lawsuits, so they end up paying off these lawsuits with incentive programs. EV charging station rebates. Our local energy co-op actually will give you credit on your electric bill. It seemed to me it was like $250 if you install a level 2 charging station for electric vehicles. And the process I went through there, installed it, and then they came out, a guy came, looked at it, and goes, yeah, that looks like a charging station. And then the next month, there was a credit on my electric bill. And then we shouldn't forget net metering, because the utilities are tinkering around the edges on that. And net metering has been one of the critical incentives for renewable energy, for solar specifically. And at its broadest, the way it worked is when you're using power from the utility, your meter runs and keeps count of how much power you're drawing from the utility. Then in the day when you're generating excess power, the meter runs backwards, and you try and size your system so that at the end of the month or the end of the year, you're netting out at zero and you only pay the net amount. So effectively under that scenario, you're paying retail, or the utility's paying retail. Yeah, Al, you have a question?
Yeah, I stuck it in the chat, but I was interested, the SREX, does that apply to the net that you send to the utility, or does it apply to all the power you generate in a month?
Yeah, it applies to everything you generated.
So even if I don't consume it all?
Yeah, doesn't matter.
Okay.
They're just saying you're reducing the need for fossil fuel generation from the grid. So it is a source. The fact that you're consuming it is irrelevant as far as they're concerned. So, but you do have to be connected to the grid. That's for sure. All right. So what we're seeing with net metering is the net metering is getting tinkered around with. The utilities are coming back, and they have a good argument for this. They're saying, you know what? We're in the business of selling power. Why are you forcing us to pay retail? We don't pay retail when we buy power. We just pay wholesale. We pay wholesale for it. We sell it at retail. That's how business works. So if you're making us buy power from the local customer, why don't we just pay them wholesale? So that's kind of where we're going. So, so you end up getting, you buy from them at 18 cents a kilowatt hour. They pay you 4 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, for some reason, retail keeps going up and wholesale keeps going down. So I don't know that they're being entirely straightforward, but their argument is sound. Then the other thing they're adding to it is they're saying, you know what, it costs us money just to connect you to the grid. So we need to have some non-bypassable charges, such as customer access fees and the like. Well, in the regulated part of the house, the investor-owned utilities, typically the public utility commissions set those fees. They just say, okay, $10, $15, $12. In the past, hasn't been that much. They're pushing it. I just saw where California public utility bumped it up to $40 a month for access fees, non-bypassable. The utilities asked for $70 a month. That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, there are some situations where it costs a lot for the utility to provide power to that home. Rural locations where there's perhaps miles between houses. But in an urban location, there's just no way it costs that much to provide power to these homes. So, they're trying to use that, the non-bypassable charge, as a disincentive for you to go solar. So net metering is under threat which then leads us to the reaction, which is typically to install batteries and to maybe go off grid, or to certainly when you get into time of day pricing, to offset some of that. Or if they're going to pay me 4 cents, I pay them 18 cents. Well, then I'm not going to send any power back to them. It just doesn't make sense. Why would I sell it so cheap? I'll self-consume. I'll store it in a battery and use it, so all of those things are incentives, benefits, ever changing, ever moving, ever morphing. All right, so that kind of gets us to the end of the residential. Anybody have any questions on residential solar incentives? Looking up at my screen there. And as I move forward, let's talk a little bit about commercial. So the commercial tax incentives from the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the ITCs, investment tax credits. There's the 30% base credit, same as we saw with residential, 30%. Then I'm going to skip over the second one, go to domestic content. There's a 10% bump here if you're using domestically produced components. All right, that's in the very first item we had in the solar news today. We said one of the things that the IRA was trying to do was boost domestic manufacturing capacity. This is the way they're doing it, giving you 10% extra if you use domestically manufactured. It is working in manufacturers adding capacity, but we're still far behind what we need. And this gets a little bit complicated, and I'll touch on it in a little more depth here in a second. Then there's the energy community 10% bump. Now, I always think of this as the Joe Manchin provision. He basically was the holdout on this whole legislation, and he basically got a 10% rider if your community was dependent upon fossil fuel, not only as an extraction, but also as a means of employment. So developed a very complicated process, which fortunately for us has gotten a little bit easier on how to implement, which I'll touch on here in a second as well. And then the last one of these tax credits for commercial is the qualifying low-income residential, and that can be either 10% or 20%. So if it is the array is being installed in a low-income area, it's 10%. If you're installing it as part of a low-income residential housing project, it can be 20%. But the critical differentiation on this one is you got to apply for it and be awarded it. It's not automatic. The other three, the solar tax credit, the domestic content, the energy community content, those happen automatically if you qualify. You just take them on your taxes, you get them automatically. The low income residential thing, you got to apply for it. You got to be awarded it. Then you can get it. So that's a critical difference on that one. All right, so let's talk about energy communities. And I put the website here in this slide. And this is where you go in for this map. Somebody just asked, what is the community? Is it by county? Is it by zip code? Oh, if only it were that simple. It is by census tract, which why not? That can get very, very complicated, obviously, because census tracts don't follow anything that any of us know about. So they're kind of all over the place. But you can go into this website, and there's this map here. This is the website, the energycommunities.gov/energy community tax credit bonus. So that's the website you want to make note of. And then this is the map that's going to pop up when you're there. And what this is doing, if you go up in the right-hand corner, there's a little search magnifying glass there. You click on that, and you'll enter in the address of the property that you're looking for. And then you'll see on the left, there's a code, which makes a little bit more sense when we get into the next slide. So I plugged in Blue Rock, Ohio here, and it pulls us straight into the map. And you see all of these different census tracts are highlighted. Now, Blue Rock is that little dot right there in the very center of the map there. And you'll notice the purple, which it's directly adjacent to, would qualify if I were located over in that track because of unemployment rates and poverty rates and things like that. The green, the dark green qualifies because there was a coal power plant or a coal mine that was closed in that location. And then the light green is a census tract that is directly adjacent to the track where the coal thing was closed. So in my particular situation here, Blue Rock, depending on which side of the river you're on, you're still going to qualify. One, because you're poor, and the other one, because you don't have any coal anymore. So, so in this particular thing here, Blue Rock Station would qualify for the 10% bonus. And all I have to do is just look at that map. So there's a lot of criteria that goes in, like years that it was closed and things like that. You don't even have to know that anymore. You can just go by this map, which is very helpful. And we use it quite a lot when we're doing the assessments, where you just pop in there, find out if that location qualifies for the 10% bump, and then you can put it in the financial analysis there. So any questions about energy communities as part of this before I move on? Pretty much if you live in the state of West Virginia, the entire state qualifies. All right. That is composed, and it has to be, yeah, it has to be coal power plant that's closed. If you have like a natural gas power plant or something like that, it doesn't qualify. All right, so so then we talk about domestic content. So what is considered a U.S. manufactured product? Well, you know, like every question that starts out simple can get very complicated. So this was some of the guidance there. Manufactured products considered one that's produced in the U.S. If all of the manufacturing processes for the manufactured product take place in the U.S. and all the components are manufactured in the US. Okay, kind of simple enough, except really you're probably going to find 0 products that are complex where every component in those were manufactured. And then when we talk about solar panels, you can go, okay, so solar panels assembled in Georgia. Tick, right? Nope, solar cells came from China. So the component of that panel was, all right, so then let's open up a solar cell manufacturing facility in Minnesota. Great, we did. Where was the silicon mined? Okay, so came from China. You know, so you drill down further and further and further. So it's not that easy. Yeah, and then they say, what about junction boxes? What about MC4 connectors? All of those things. So they've gotten it to where it's not like 100% of the thing has to be, it's percentages. So for instance, they're saying 100% of the steel and iron that's part of the structural components has to be US made. Very strong provision trying to rebuild the steel iron industry here in the United States. So your racking, things like that. I think aluminum is supposed to be in there too. So the metal parts. Then they say, all right, if you, before 2025, 40% of the components have to be domestically manufactured. So it could be, I guess, 40% of, you know, of the total components, or 40% of the component itself, you know. So extremely complicated on how to figure out what qualifies, what doesn't. I keep waiting for the manufacturers to do that work for us. And I just haven't seen any ads come out where, you know, to me, if I'm a manufacturer and I qualify, I'm going to stamp it on every advertisement. This panel qualifies for the domestic manufacturing criteria. You know, this inverter qualifies. This junction box qualifies. You know, the fact that I haven't seen them indicates to me that they're not there yet. I might be reading into it more than there is, but I just know, if you qualified, you'd be advertising the heck out of it. And then this percentage keeps going up. In 2025, it goes up to 45%, then 2026 to 50%, 2027 to 55%, and then it stays there. So 55% of the components and all of that have to be part. And these are for systems that are 1 megawatt of energy or less. So my assumption is the larger systems, the big utility scale, they're gonna talk more like production tax credits. I didn't want to touch on that because basically it's like a manufacturing credit, but it's part of this as well. Okay, any questions about the domestic supply thing? All right, then we've got, I'm going to jump through these, the 10 points for the low income, if it's on low income land, 20% if it's low income housing. These are things you're definitely going to need to have an accountant help you with. There's applications on this. The application period's going on right now. Began May 28th for these, and it closes on June 27th. Last year, when they offered these, they had about 4 times as many applicants as awarded as capacity to award. Other ITC issues that are of significant note is nonprofits now can get a tax rebate, the incentive. Before tax credits, they just go, okay, well, you don't pay federal tax, so of no benefit to you. Now, if I'm a nonprofit or a governmental body and I want to install solar, I can get that 30% tax credit, or the 40% if I'm in an energy region, as a refund when I file my 990 or whatever it is that you file if you're a nonprofit. And businesses can sell their tax incentives. There's a marketplace for these things now. So nonprofits don't pay taxes. Well, a lot of businesses, they're not profitable enough, or they've hired Don to manipulate their income and all of that, so that they don't appear to be making a profit because everything's funneled to some offshore island system. Anyway, so if I don't owe taxes, if I don't find that of value, I can sell that to somebody who does. And that's a big incentive. That's a big part of this whole thing.
Jay,
yeah,
just right there, just to be aware, you can only sell them once, the original generator. And there's some uncertainty of, let's say that you sell them and somebody buys them and then the IRS audits them. What happens when there's an audit adjustment? So there's some complexity there. It's not just like you're getting free taxes, paying 90 cents on the dollar for your credit. There's some risk there, some due diligence you have to do, just to keep in mind.
Okay. Spoken like a true accountant. Right?
That's right.
Okay. And I want to touch on the REAP program here. REAP is Rural Energy for America. This is huge if you're an agricultural producer or a small business. It is not available for residential. So it'll pay up to 50% as a grant for your solar installation. And small business is defined within the North American industry classification system. So like everything else, it's a little bit complicated. What's considered rural? Any jurisdiction outside of a city or town with greater than 50,000 inhabitants. REAP is for-profit businesses. Somebody just mentioned it is not for nonprofits. There is a distinction there. Some of what is a small business? Well, it's either based on income when you go into that code. Like I found it interesting, $2.5 million for goat farming, but $47 million if you're in oil and gas. And some are based on number of employees. And depending on the industry, it ranges like from 500 employees to 1,500 as the maximum. So the applications happen quarterly, the end of each quarter. You can apply for up to $1 million as part of the grant. If you're a farmer, you'd file this, as part of your income, Schedule F. The other forms, there is a scoring process. So there's an application. It's not automatic. You apply for it, you're awarded it. There was a lot of money put into this in the IRA. So $820 million allocated for this program. So I know when I do assessments for the REAP program, if it's a serious installation, pretty much all of them in the state of Ohio have gotten funded. There's an abundant amount of money. Now that's going to run out as more and more people apply, but it's there and it's real and it will pay 50%. The thing to bear in mind with the tax credit and also these REAP grants is they are all reimbursements. So if you're going out and installing a $100,000 installation, you may find that you're getting $50,000 back in a REAP grant, but that comes later after you've already paid the money. And your tax credit comes later after you paid the money. So bridge loan or having access to capital is a big issue when folks are doing this. Also, the REAP grant has to be treated as income. I think there's another variation and, it's like, okay, if you take it out of the basis or whatever, but either way, it's not just free money. It's taxable income for most situations. And accelerated depreciation, I don't want to get into this too much because I don't understand it overly, but you can accelerate the depreciation on these systems, and as a business you can. As a personal investment on your home, you cannot depreciate these things. But as a business investment, you can, and depending on your tax rate, it can be pretty significant. And they did allow in the first year 100% in the first year, in 2022. Now they're stepping that down. As I understand it, last year you could have deducted 80% in the first year, 60% this year, this tax year, 40%, or you can always do the 5-year accelerated depreciation schedule, which looks something like this, which I think is funny when they say it's a 5-year system, but it takes 6 years. But that's government talk. But it allows you to not just straight line depreciate a thing. If you're doing it straight line, it would be more like, this is a 25-year product. It's costing me $25,000. So I can deduct $1,000 every year. In this case, you can get it faster. That's all. And then a couple of other notable items are out there. Solar for All has just been announced here. There's a lot of money going out the door on this. It's created for the expanding solar on low-income housing. The Biden administration says they're hoping to put almost 1 million homes with solar, low-income and disadvantaged communities. I think they're kind of being smart about this because they're kind of looking at the upcoming election, wondering what might happen. So they're awarding these grants very quickly to other nonprofit entities that are then going to divvy them out so that the money's out the door in case Biden's out the door. That's kind of my impression of what they're doing there. And then green retrofit grants. And then I should also mention, I did mention about bridge loans, and there are entities out there that can help you with that. Getting a bridge loan that allows you, for instance, to borrow that $100,000 up front and then pay it back when you get your grant and when you get your tax incentive. And then PACE financing. And PACE financing is another way that in some locales, you don't actually finance it. Well, you do finance it, but you finance it through the local government and then pay it back through your taxes so that the loan is essentially with the property and not necessarily with the owner of the property. So if you sell that property, that obligation goes with the property. It's as part of a tax payback or a lien, not truly a lien, but a lien on the property. Okay. And that is a quick recap. Well, not so quick, but we're over our time limit by a couple of minutes. So I guess I'll just thank you all for your attention, and we'll see you guys all next week. Take care.